never thought my life could unravel in the blink of an eye, but it did. One moment I was a wife who had sacrificed everything, my career, my dreams, even my health, to stand beside a man I believed was my partner, my equal, my protector. And in the next, I was nothing more than a stranger tossed onto the cold streets by the very person I had once promised to love forever. But to tell you how I got here, I need to start with the man who, in his own way, saw me better than anyone else ever did, my father-in-law. He was a hard man, yes, strict and unyielding at times, but behind that steel exterior, there was wisdom and a kind of protective warmth I had never felt, not even from my own family. He was the only one who ever looked me in the eye and said, "You're worth more than you realize." I didn't believe him then. I thought he said it just to be kind, but I didn't know that one day, those words would be the last rope I'd cling to as the world I built collapsed around me. My husband, well, my ex-husband now, wasn't always this cold, arrogant monster. When we first met, he was charming, ambitious, full of dreams. I was drawn to that fire, thinking we would build an empire together. But somewhere along the way, that fire turned into a hunger, and that hunger turned into greed. He didn't want us to succeed. He wanted to succeed, alone, and I became nothing more than the woman in the background, the shadow making sure he shined in every room. When his father fell ill, something shifted in the house. My husband became restless, pacing at night, always on the phone with lawyers and financial advisors. And me? I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the back of his head, wondering when he had last asked me how I was doing. The silence between us became louder than any words. Still, I stayed. I told myself marriage was about loyalty, about sacrifice. Little did I know, my sacrifices would be nothing compared to what was coming. The day his father passed, the air felt heavy, as if the whole world held its breath. My husband didn't shed a tear, not one. Instead, his lips curled into the faintest smile, as if this was the day he'd been waiting for. I remember looking at him horrified. How could he? That man had raised him, had built the empire he now stood to inherit, and yet all he saw was money. The house was buzzing that evening. Relatives, lawyers, distant cousins who hadn't spoken to us in years, all circling like vultures. I stood in the corner, clutching a glass of water, invisible. My husband didn't even introduce me, didn't acknowledge me. He was already speaking about his future, his company, his fortune. My heart sank lower with every word, but still I stayed quiet. Then it happened. It was late, the guests had left, and I was clearing the glasses when he walked into the kitchen, his face lit with excitement. He didn't say, "We inherited." He didn't say, "Our lives will change." No, he slammed his hand on the counter and said, "I don't need you anymore." I froze. I thought I misheard him, but he repeated it, slower this time, each word like a knife carving into me. "I don't need you anymore." I laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of cruel joke. But then he smirked. That smug, arrogant smirk I had begun to notice more often in recent months, and he said the words that would break me. "You're worthless. Always have been. You couldn't give me children. You couldn't give me status. I carried you long enough. It's over." Before I could even process, he grabbed my suitcase from the closet, already packed. He had packed my things before even telling me. He shoved it into my arms, opened the door, and said, "Get out." Just like that. Years of sacrifice, of loyalty, of love, thrown out in the dark. I stumbled into the night, my body trembling, tears blurring my vision. The suitcase felt heavier than my entire life. I had nowhere to go, no family to run to. And yet, in that silence, I heard the echo of my father-in-law's voice. "You're worth more than you realize." I wanted to believe it. I really did, but right then I felt like nothing. The days that followed were a blur. I slept on a friend's couch, my phone buzzing with calls from unknown numbers I ignored. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the arrogance, the cruelty. I replayed every sacrifice I'd made, every time I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace, every dream I had buried to let his shine. Rage and grief danced together inside me, a storm I couldn't quiet. And then came the day of the will reading. I almost didn't go. Why would I? He had made it clear I was nothing. But something inside me, a whisper I couldn't ignore, pushed me to show up. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was pride, or maybe deep down, I wanted to see his smug face crumble. The lawyer's office was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Families gathered in tight groups, murmuring about inheritances, already dividing fortunes in their minds. I walked in alone, heads turned, eyes narrowed. I wasn't welcome there, but I didn't care. He sat across the room, my husband, dressed in an expensive suit, his watch gleaming under the light. He didn't even glance at me. His eyes were fixed forward, his jaw tight with impatience. He thought this was his coronation, the moment the empire was placed in his hands. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he opened the thick envelope. The room fell silent. Every breath felt heavy. He began with the formalities, the list of assets, the general distributions. My husband leaned back, smug, already picturing himself at the top of the world. And then, the lawyer paused. I'll never forget the look he gave my husband. A look that sliced through his arrogance like a blade, calm, steady, deliberate. "Did you bother reading the will in its entirety?" the lawyer asked. The room stirred with confusion. My husband frowned, leaning forward. "What do you mean?" "I don't need to read it. I know what's mine." The lawyer raised an eyebrow, his voice cool. "I suggest you listen carefully, because things are not quite as you assumed." And at that moment, the air shifted. My husband's smirk faltered, the first crack in his arrogance showing. I sat frozen, my heart pounding, because for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope and fear. Because whatever was coming next, I knew it would change everything. The lawyer's words still echoed in my head. "Did you bother reading the will in its entirety?" The room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My husband shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his arrogance cracking as he leaned forward. "What do you mean by that? Of course, everything belongs to me. I'm his only son." The lawyer's eyes didn't waver. He tapped the paper in front of him, his voice steady and deliberate. "That's not entirely true. In fact, your father was very specific about who deserves what, and he didn't base it on blood alone." A murmur rippled across the room. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't dare move, afraid to miss a single word. My husband's jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The lawyer continued, his tone sharp, slicing through the suffocating tension. "Your father believed that loyalty, compassion, and dedication to family should matter more than entitlement or greed. And so certain parts of his estate have been allocated accordingly." My husband slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising. "Stop playing games. Just read it." The lawyer adjusted his glasses, unfazed by the outburst. He looked directly at me before speaking the next words. My stomach dropped. "To my daughter-in-law, who stood by my side when others turned away, who cared for me when I was weak, and who reminded me of dignity when others showed me none, I leave." The room seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure if I had heard correctly. Me, he mentioned me. My husband whipped his head toward me, his face twisted with disbelief. "What?" But the lawyer went on, his voice echoing through the room like thunder. "I leave a controlling share of my company and assets to ensure she will never be left without security, no matter the choices of others." The silence that followed was deafening. My hands trembled as I tried to process what I had just heard. The company, the assets, security. He hadn't just left me something symbolic. He had given me power. Real power. My husband's face turned crimson, his eyes burning with rage. He leapt to his feet, pointing a finger at the lawyer. "This is a mistake. My father would never do this. He knows she's nothing. She's worthless." His words cut like knives, but for the first time, they didn't sink as deeply as before. Because in that moment, I realized he was wrong. His father had seen me, really seen me, and he had chosen to protect me even in death. The lawyer raised a brow. "If you doubt the legitimacy, you're free to contest it. But the documents are signed, sealed, and witnessed. This was your father's decision. Gasps filled the room. My husband's relatives shifted uncomfortably, whispering to one another. No one looked him in the eye. For the first time, he wasn't the golden boy, the heir everyone fawned over. He was just a man whose mask was slipping. His fury exploded. "You planned this," he snarled at me. "You manipulated him, didn't you?" Whispered lies into his ear while he was weak. "You think you've won? You'll regret this." I wanted to shrink back, to let his rage wash over me like it always had. But something inside me had changed. I straightened my shoulders, meeting his glare with steady eyes. "I didn't ask for this," I said quietly, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "But maybe your father knew the truth about who we really are." The lawyer cleared his throat, cutting through the standoff. "There are further instructions regarding the company's management, but they can be discussed privately. For now, this concludes the reading." Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood, murmuring, their eyes darting between me and my husband. I sat frozen, my thoughts spiraling. I had walked into this room invisible, discarded, worthless in his eyes. And I was walking out with something Heb could never take back, his father's trust, and the keys to everything he thought belonged to him. But I also knew this wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning. Because as I stood to leave, I could feel his eyes burning into my back, full of hatred and promises of revenge. And deep down, I knew he wasn't going to let this go. That night, lying awake on my friend's couch, I replayed every moment. The shock on his face, the venom in his voice, the unexpected gift his father had left me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt a flicker of strength, a whisper of defiance. But I was also afraid. Because if I knew my husband at all, he would come for me. He would try to destroy me, to reclaim what he thought was his. And I would have to decide, was I going to run, or was I finally going to fight? The days after the will reading felt unreal, like I was living someone else's life. I went from being thrown out like garbage by my husband to suddenly being the woman everyone whispered about, the woman who now held power over $1 billion empire. But if anyone thought that meant I felt secure, they were wrong. Because with every phone call I ignored, every unfamiliar car that slowed down near my friend's building, I knew he wasn't done with me. He would never accept what had happened, and I wasn't naive enough to think he'd just walk away. The first sign came 2 nights later. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling, my thoughts chasing themselves in circles, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. At first, there was only silence on the other end. Then a low chuckle, familiar and cold, slithered through the line. "Enjoying my company, sweetheart?" My blood ran cold. "It's not your company," I managed to whisper, my hands shaking. His laugh was sharp, mocking. "Oh, please. Don't fool yourself. Everyone knows you're a fraud. You wouldn't even know where to begin running it. But don't worry, I'll take care of things, like I always have. And when I'm through, you'll be nothing again." I hung up, my heart pounding, my chest tight. But the calls didn't stop. Every day, a new number, a new threat. Sometimes he wouldn't speak at all, just breathing on the line, reminding me that he was out there, watching, waiting. My friend suggested going to the police, but what would I tell them? That my ex-husband was calling me? He hadn't made a direct threat yet. Besides, men like him knew how to play the system. He'd twist it, make me look hysterical, unstable. He'd done it before. Then the second sign came. I had agreed to meet the lawyer privately to go over the finer details of the will. I walked into his office nervous, clutching my bag like it was armor. He greeted me with a kind smile and slid the papers across the desk. "Your father-in-law was meticulous," he said. "He wanted to make sure you would be protected." I scanned the documents, my eyes widening with every paragraph. Shares, properties, trusts, control over major company decisions. It was more than I could have ever imagined. But then my eyes landed on a section that made my breath hitch. Clause 17. In the event of misconduct, mismanagement, or personal danger to the inheritor, the executor has authority to intervene and temporarily assume control until matters are resolved. Personal danger? I asked, my self-voice shaking. The lawyer nodded gravely. Your father-in-law anticipated that your husband might not handle this news well. He wanted to ensure you'd be safe. Safe. The word felt hollow. Because no paper, no clause, no lawyer could protect me from the man I had once loved. As if on cue, the door to the office burst open. And there he was, my husband, his eyes wild, his face twisted with rage. You! He snarled, pointing at me. You think you've won? You think you can take what's mine? The lawyer stood, trying to intervene, but my husband shoved past him, slamming his hands on the desk in front of me. His breath was hot, his voice low and venomous. You don't deserve a penny. You don't deserve his name. And I swear, if you don't sign it all back to me, you'll regret the day you ever stepped into this family. My body froze, my throat dry. But then, somewhere deep inside, I felt something shift, a spark of defiance. I met his glare, my voice trembling but steady. I didn't take anything. Your father gave it to me. Maybe because he finally saw the truth about you. For a moment, silence. Then he laughed, a harsh, broken sound. The truth? No, sweetheart. You don't know the truth, but you will. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The lawyer rushed to my side. Are you all right? I nodded, though my legs trembled beneath me. Inside, though, I knew I wasn't all right. That wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. And the way he had said it, the darkness in his eyes, it chilled me to the bone. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside made me jump. I kept replaying his words. You don't know the truth. But you will. What truth? The next morning I got my answer. I was walking to a cafe near my friend's place when a black car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down and a man in a suit leaned out. Mrs. Harrington? He asked politely. I'm not, I started, but he cut me off. Your husband sent us. He'd like a word. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear footsteps behind me, shouts, the screech of tires. Somehow I ducked into an alley and escaped, my lungs burning, my mind racing. By the time I got back to my friend's apartment, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the keys. He wasn't just threatening me anymore. He was hunting me. And that's when I realized I couldn't keep running. I had to fight. But how do you fight a man with money, power, and no conscience? I started digging. Late at night, when my friend was asleep, I scoured through old company records, public filings, anything I could get my hands on. I remembered the way my father-in-law used to talk about the company, how proud he was, but also how worried. He had suspected corruption, backroom deals, but he never said too much. And then I found it. Buried in a folder no one thought to hide well enough. Transactions, fake vendors, shell companies, money being siphoned off quietly, month after month. Millions. And whose name was tied to it? My husband's. The truth. The truth he had warned me about. Suddenly, everything clicked. His desperation, his rage. It wasn't just about the inheritance. He was terrified, because if anyone discovered what he had done, he wouldn't just lose the company. He would lose everything, his wealth, his freedom. I sat there in the dim light of the laptop screen, my hands trembling as I stared at the evidence. For so long he had made me feel small, invisible, powerless. But now, I held the one thing that could bring him to his knees. I closed the laptop, my heart racing. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of him, because I had the one weapon he couldn't take from me, the truth. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The documents I had uncovered replayed in my mind over and over again. Each line, each transaction was a piece of a puzzle that revealed the man I had once loved for who he truly was. A fraud, a thief, a predator who didn't just feed on me, but on the company his father had built with blood and sweat. For years, he made me feel small, powerless. He told me I couldn't survive without him, that I was nothing on my own. But sitting there, with his crimes glowing on the screen in front of me, I realized I had something he could never control. proof. The next morning, I took a deep breath and printed everything I had found. My hands trembled as I stacked the papers into a neat file. I felt like I was holding fire in my hands. Dangerous, consuming, but powerful. I wasn't stupid. I knew confronting him directly would be suicide. He wasn't the kind of man to back down quietly, especially not when he had so much to lose. So I stayed quiet, pretending to be the same frightened, broken woman he thought I was. All the while I planned. But fate never gives you time to prepare the way you want. 3 days later, I left my friend's apartment early in the morning, heading to meet the lawyer again. I wanted to ask him what to do with what I had found, whether it could protect me, maybe even help me claim what my father-in-law had intended for me. I never made it. As I turned the corner onto a quieter street, I felt it before I saw it, a presence behind me, heavy and sharp. I quickened my pace. So did they. I broke into a run, clutching my bag to my chest. But before I could scream, a hand clamped over my mouth and yanked me into a waiting car. The world spun as I was shoved inside. My head hit the seat, the metallic taste of fear filling my mouth. When I looked up, he was there, my husband, smiling. Well, he drawled, leaning back casually, as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. You've been busy, haven't you? My throat tightened. What do you want from me? His smile widened, cruel and cold. Everything. The shares, the assets, the little scraps my father was foolish enough to hand you. Sign it over, and maybe I'll let you walk away. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my shaking hands. And if I don't? His eyes darkened. He leaned close, his whisper like poison in my ear. Then I'll make sure you disappear so completely. No one will even remember you existed. For a moment, terror threatened to drown me. But then I remembered the folder tucked deep inside my bag. The evidence, my weapon. I swallowed hard, forcing steel into my voice. You should be more careful with your threats. Because if anything happens to me, certain documents might find their way into the wrong hands. The change in his expression was instant. His smugness faltered, his jaw tightening. What did you say? I met his eyes, my fear hidden behind a mask of defiance. I know what you've been doing. The fake accounts, the stolen money. Your father suspected it too, didn't he? That's why he protected me. Because he knew the truth about you. He froze, his eyes narrowing into slits. For the first time I saw it. The fear he worked so hard to hide. Then he laughed, but it was hollow, forced. You think you're clever. You think a few pieces of paper will save you? No one will believe you. You're nothing. Always have been. I let his words wash over me, but they didn't sink in this time. Not anymore. Maybe, I whispered. But even nothing can burn everything down if pushed far enough. His fist slammed against the seat beside me, making me flinch, but I didn't back down. He seethed for a long moment before finally signaling to the driver. The car screeched to a halt, and the door was yanked open. Get out, he spat. I stumbled onto the pavement, my legs weak, my heart racing. The car sped off, leaving a trail of exhaust in the cold air. I stood there, shaken but alive, and more determined than ever. That was his mistake. He should have broken me when he had the chance. But instead he reminded me of something my father-in-law once told me when he caught me doubting myself. Strength doesn't come from never being broken. It comes from learning how to rise again, sharper than before. I walked away from that street with fire in my veins. From that day on, I stopped hiding. I moved into a hotel under a new name, one he wouldn't easily track. I contacted the lawyer, carefully telling him enough to make him understand without putting him in danger. And I started reaching out to allies, people in the company who had always respected me, people who had seen glimpses of my husband's true nature. Slowly, I began to build my case. But he wasn't sitting still either. He began a smear campaign against me. Articles appeared in the news, painting me as a manipulative gold digger who had tricked an old man in his final days. Anonymous tips were sent to tabloids claiming I was unstable, addicted to pills, even abusive. People who had once smiled at me in company halls now looked at me with suspicion. And yet, every time I felt the weight of his lies pressing me down, I would open that folder, look at the damning proof, and remind myself I had the truth. And the truth was stronger than any rumor. Then came the breaking point. I received an email one night. No name, no signature, just a single sentence. Meet me at the old factory tomorrow if you want more on your husband's secrets. My gut screamed trap. But my heart told me it could be the key. If there was more, if I could expose not just the fraud, but the rot at the heart of everything he'd touched, then maybe I could finally destroy him. So I went. The factory was dark, abandoned, its broken windows staring like empty eyes. My footsteps echoed on the cracked concrete as I stepped inside. My flashlight cut through the dust and shadows. Every sound made me jump. Hello? I called, my voice trembling. And then I saw him. Not my husband, someone else. A man in his 50s with tired eyes and a wary look. You don't know me, he said quietly. But I worked for your father-in-law for 20 years. I saw what your husband was doing. I tried to speak up once, but he made sure I lost everything. His voice cracked. Your father-in-law wanted to stop him, but he didn't have time. He trusted you would. He handed me a flash drive, his hand shaking. This has everything. Not just the money he stole, but the deals he made. Dangerous people, dangerous places. If this goes public, he won't just lose the company. He'll lose his freedom. I stared at the drive in my hand, the weight of it pressing down like destiny. Why are you giving this to me? The man looked away, his voice low. Because someone has to finish what your father-in-law started. And because I owe him that much. Before I could say more, headlights flashed through the broken windows. Tires screeched. My heart dropped. He found us, the man whispered. A car door slammed. Footsteps echoed outside. My blood turned to ice. It was him. My husband. His voice rang out, sharp and furious. I knew you couldn't resist. Always so predictable. The man pushed me toward the back door. Go, take it and run. No, go, he shouted. The door burst open and my husband's men flooded in. Chaos erupted. Shouts, the sound of fists, glass shattering. I ran, clutching the drive to my chest, my breath ragged, my heart hammering. Behind me, I heard the man cry out, followed by a sickening thud. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I burst out into the night, the cold air burning my lungs, and ran until my legs gave out. When I finally collapsed in the shadows of a deserted street, I opened my hand. The flash drive glinted faintly under the streetlight. Proof, more than I ever imagined. Enough to end him. But as I sat there, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face, I knew the cost. The man who had helped me, I didn't even know if he was alive. And my husband, he was closer than ever now, his rage boiling, his mask completely shattered. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This wasn't even about revenge. It was survival. And I swore to myself, clutching that tiny piece of plastic in my hand, that I would not let his threats, his lies, his violence define me any longer. For years, I had been silent, invisible, but not anymore. Now, I had the truth, and I was going to use it. I didn't sleep that night either. I don't think I could have, even if I tried. The flash drive sat on the table beside me, its tiny metallic frame catching the dim light of the hotel lamp. It looked so small, so fragile, but inside it was enough power to destroy a man who had spent years making me believe I was nothing. I kept replaying the factory in my head. The sound of fists, the man's desperate voice telling me to run, the silence that followed. Guilt clawed at me. He had risked everything to give me that drive. Was he dead now because of me? Was his blood on my hands? By morning, the guilt had transformed into something else. A weapon. I couldn't waste his sacrifice. If I did, then all of this, my suffering, the lawyer's warnings, the man's life, would mean nothing. But I also knew I had to be smart. My husband wasn't going to stop. He was circling, waiting for me to make a mistake. Every move I made from here on had to be deliberate, calculated. I started by examining the contents of the flash drive. And what I found, it was worse than I imagined. Offshore accounts with millions siphoned out of the company. Secret partnerships with dangerous organizations I didn't even want to know more about. Money laundering, shell companies, falsified records. He had built an empire of rot beneath the company's polished floors. My hands shook as I scrolled through the files. He wasn't just a greedy man. He was a criminal. And if the wrong people knew I had this drive, my life would be worth less than the dirt under their shoes. But then, buried in the mess, I found something unexpected. Emails. Dozens of them. Some between him and associates, but others between him and board members. People who had smiled at me in meetings. People who had stood beside his father's coffin with solemn faces. They knew. They had helped him cover it up. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the entire system that had protected him. And if I wanted true revenge, if I wanted true justice, I couldn't just take him down. I had to take all of them down. The thought terrified me, but it also thrilled me. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer reacting to his moves. For the first time, I was planning mine. I decided to set a trap. I contacted the lawyer first. His reaction was exactly what I expected: panic. He told me to destroy the drive, to disappear, to think about my safety. But I saw something else in his eyes: hope. He wanted to fight, even if fear made him hesitant. I won't run, I told him firmly. If I do, he wins. I need you to help me, not just for me, but for everyone he's destroyed. The lawyer hesitated, then finally nodded. If you're really going to do this, we'll need a plan. We'll need timing, and we'll need allies. Allies. That word echoed in my mind long after he left. I started reaching out quietly, carefully. Employees who had left the company under suspicious circumstances. People who had whispered doubts about him behind closed doors but never dared speak publicly. Each time, I revealed just enough of the evidence to make them believe me. Each time, I saw the same fire light up in their eyes. Slowly, I built a circle of people who wanted him gone as much as I did. And with each new ally, my courage grew. But he wasn't sitting still either. One evening, as I left the lawyer's office, I noticed a car parked across the street. The same car I had seen outside my hotel 2 nights ago. My heart pounded as I ducked into an alley and made a long, winding path back, every step heavy with the knowledge that I was being watched. When I finally reached the hotel room, my phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number. Just 3 words. You can't hide. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. He was closing in. That night I barely blinked. I sat by the window, the flash drive clutched in my hand, waiting for the shadows to move. But as the city slept, I came to a realization. I couldn't keep running like this. The longer I waited, the more dangerous it became. It was time to strike. I contacted the media. Not the mainstream outlets, he owned too many of them already. I found independent journalists, the kind who lived for exposing corruption, the kind who couldn't be bought. I arranged a meeting in secret, passing them copies of the files. Their faces paled as they scrolled through the evidence. This is going to blow everything apart, one of them whispered. That's the point, I replied. My voice was steady, even though my hands were cold. I want the world to see who he really is. The story went live 2 days later, and all hell broke loose. Headlines exploded with his name. News channels broadcasted charts of stolen funds, secret accounts, shady partners. The company's stock plummeted overnight. Investors demanded answers. And the board, the very board that had once turned their noses up at me, was forced into emergency sessions to control the fallout. My husband, of course, was furious. He stormed onto television, declaring me a liar, a bitter widow trying to tarnish his reputation. But every time he opened his mouth, another piece of evidence appeared to prove him wrong. Then came the arrest warrants. Not just for him, but for several board members. One by one, they were dragged into the light. Their polished images shattered, their names disgraced. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had thought I'd lost forever: power. But the fight wasn't over, because even as his empire collapsed around him, he refused to fall quietly. One night, as I walked back to the hotel, I felt it again. That presence, that prickle on the back of my neck. I turned and there he was, Not in a car this time, not surrounded by men. Just him, standing in the shadows, his face twisted with fury. "You think you've won?" he hissed, stepping closer. "You think you've destroyed me? You have no idea who I am. You have no idea what I can do." I stood my ground, my fists clenched. "No, you're right. I didn't know who you were. Not until now. But the world does, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." He lunged, his hand wrapping around my arm like a vice. But this time I didn't freeze. I shoved him back with every ounce of strength in me, my voice cutting through the night like a blade. "You don't control me anymore." For a moment he just stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with hatred. Then he laughed, a broken, hollow sound. "You'll regret this," he whispered. "I'll make sure of it." But the next day, he didn't come for me. The police did. They came for him. I watched from a distance as he was led out of the building in handcuffs. His head held high, his arrogance still intact. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, the world watching the mighty man fall. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. In the weeks that followed, the company went through chaos. Trials began, secrets unraveled, and the old empire crumbled brick by brick. But from those ashes, something new started to rise. The board, desperate to save face, came to me. For years they had dismissed me, underestimated me, treated me as invisible. But now, with the evidence I had provided, with the loyalty of the employees I had rallied, they had no choice but to see me for who I really was. They offered me a seat at the table, not as a token, not as a widow, but as a partner, and I accepted. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about building something better, something my father-in-law would have been proud of. Looking back now, I realized the journey wasn't just about destroying a man who tried to break me. It was about discovering myself, about learning that even in the darkest corners, even when everything is stripped away, there is still strength inside waiting to be unleashed. He once told me I was nothing. But nothing can turn into everything when it refuses to be silenced. And I will never be silenced again.